So I'm joined today by two really quite remarkable young women, it has to be said, Kat White and Freya Bromley. Kat White is a writer, actor, and filmmaker. But you're also a gender advisor for the UN, is that right, Kat?
Yeah.
That's quite
in my spare time.
In your spare time, of which there seems to be, not that much because you're doing so much. Kat has created a really beautiful film called 54 Days. It's a short film, which is currently being developed into a feature-length film. Stars Celia Imrie, and it follows the journey of a young woman whose father takes his own life, and she starts wild swimming in the lake where he takes his own life every day for 54 days to mark the 54 years that he was alive. It's a beautiful film, and expecting big things from you, Kat, in the future. Forbes have also named you their under 30 people to watch. So yeah, it's really exciting to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
No, it's really great. Thank you. And we've had a quick chat earlier on another event this week, and you have some really interesting insights. So yeah. Freya Bromley is a writer and podcaster. Her beautiful book, The Tidal Year, was launched. It's quite recent, isn't it, Freya?
It's not quite yet out. So out on the 4th of May.
Out on the 4th of May. Okay, so both of you have got books out really soon. So you're the 4th of May, and Kat, you are the 22nd of June.
Exactly.
Right. So what an amazing moment to be talking to both of you, just when your creative works are about to kind of launch into the world. Yeah, that's really exciting for both of you. Freya, you also have this amazing podcast also called The Tidal Year, where you have different guests on every episode to talk about wild swimmers, essentially, or as we sometimes just call them, swimmers. I think there's this really funny thing that we call it wild swimming, but actually it's just swimming, right? And we just call it swimming. And but people know what we mean. We mean swimming in cold water in these lands. So I think today what we'll do is we will speak a little bit about both of your stories individually, and then we're going to bring in some bigger themes. I'm just going to really briefly explain what those themes might be. We're going to talk about how, as women, we lost our relationship with swimming in our teens, which I think is really quite interesting, and then refound it as we got a bit older, and how cold water swimming is very interlinked with our relationship with fear and grief, and that grief is very much about fear, and cold water swimming can kind of help to loosen our relationship with fear, because I guess it takes courage, right? To the first time that you get into some really cold water, it brings up quite a lot of apprehension. We're going to talk about swimming as a circuit breaker when you're feeling, in those kind of heightened states of anxiety or grief, or whatever, you're in a heightened emotional state. I think it'd be nice to talk a little bit about the sisterhood that exists around wild swimming, and in Britain and Ireland, actually. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some things that are particular to grief, which I'll come on to in a bit. So let's just, I had to say it, let's dive right in. I couldn't do this talk and not say that. So here we go. Kat, I'm going to come to you first. And I know that you suffered 2 significant bereavements during the pandemic. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in January 2020, so really right before the world fell apart, I suppose, the world as we knew it, I lost my uncle very suddenly, and in circumstances that still have not really been made clear, but he had always suffered his whole life, as a Black man, but also just, as somebody who, I guess, life didn't necessarily work out as it should. So that was a real wrench, because also it was so sudden. We'd just all been together at Christmas. He seemed totally fine, totally normal. And then right at the start of January, he very suddenly passed away. And that kind of tore my family apart, I would say. He was the only son, and especially in our culture as well, I think the men kind of do have a really important role to play. My granddad's no longer with us. And I kind of responded in a way that I couldn't really get my head around the fact, I think because I'd just been with him as well, that one minute he was there and the next he wasn't. And because of the circumstances surrounding his death, there was no sense of closure. And by the time the post-mortem had happened, which was kind of inconclusive, we were already into lockdown. So we never got to properly bury him and have the funeral. And I know that a lot of people will resonate with that. Then almost exactly a year later, in January 2021, my friend Simon died in similar circumstances, but clearer circumstances. He took his own life. And I think by that point, we'd gone through a year as well at this point of lockdowns and COVID, and I was totally numb. And I've spoken about it a lot, but I felt like I lost my voice. I mean, I've actually lost my voice for real now, but I really felt like I had lost my ability to articulate what I was feeling. I was just totally broken. And I think, I mean, we've spoken, Aisling, a bit before about also grief and how it can hit you at a later date. And I think whatever was going on with my uncle, I kind of experienced that for real, fully, when Simon died as well. So I was hit with this wave of just two losses that I couldn't comprehend.
And you've talked in an article that you wrote about it, about that feeling, and you're talking about it now, of feeling like it was stuck here.
Yeah.
And I think that I've heard other people relay that experience. I've heard other people describe it as like having an apple stuck in your throat,
Right.
an apple core stuck in your throat. And that's where it's almost sitting there, isn't it? It's where the grief is sitting. It's sitting there, and you can't kind of fully process it on a body level because it's literally stuck here. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And you almost felt like you wanted it to get lower down and to be able to feel it, but I couldn't. I didn't feel that I could really speak about it, because also, especially with suicide, people are processing it in such a particular way. With my uncle, my family didn't really want to engage with that side of things. With my friend, I mean, we did, but we were also in second or third lockdown. We were deep in lockdown. We weren't allowed to leave our house at that point. So my group of friends, we were doing, nightly Zoom, trying to understand what happened, but there are no words. You can't make sense of that. And some people didn't want to speak, and I was desperate to I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to understand. I wanted to do something. I felt like I needed to make sure that nobody else in my life would ever take their life again. Which was maybe not the most healthy way of processing it, but I had a feeling that I needed to do something, but I didn't know what that something was.
Yeah, but I think that's a very normal reaction to lose two people in the same way in such a short period of time during an already traumatic moment in our in our history, which is a deeply traumatic moment in our history. You just do what you need to do to get through, and to put one foot in front of the other. And if your need was to feel like, I cannot lose somebody else this way, I need to make sure this never happens, and to channel that into really what has become for you, a sense of purpose around it. I think, there is no right or wrong way. We say it all the time. It's so individual, and and your losses are individual as well. So take me to the time where I can feel very clearly, you're articulating so well that feeling of feeling stuck, feeling like you can't talk to anybody during a time where you're not able to leave the house. I mean, it's brutal. It's incredibly brutal. So take me to the moment where you first looked at that lake and what you were thinking.
Yeah. So we had the one daily allotted walk we were allowed to do. So that was kind of, I was going on that, and I remember I would often be kind of feeling like I was walking in a daze, this same feeling of just being utterly numb. And I kind of go out in a daze and come home. And I was really, really low, really low. You know, now I probably can say that was more than grief. It was maybe bordering into depression, or I lost my sense of purpose, which is interesting because statistically, those who've lost someone to suicide are actually more likely to go on and take their own lives themselves, which it seems astounding when you know what it is to experience that. But at some point on one of those walks, I was living in Oxford at the time. That's where I was locking down, and was very near Hinksey Lake, which is a mysterious, imposing, beautiful lake, kind of on the side of a train track. So trains would go by, which was almost nice in a way because it was some sign of life. It's in South Oxford, so it's called Hinksey Lake, and it's kind of it's in a park. It's sort of hidden away, but it's got a real strong contingent of swimmers there. And on one of those walks, yeah, it was a new route as well, which was interesting because I always did this kind of same circuit, but I kind of was walking, meandering, came across the lake, and it was over a bridge, went up on the bridge and looked out at the water, and it was so vast, and it was so imposing, and it was, you know, it was, I think, February at this point, so it was freezing, and I just had a feeling, you know, there's something about this water that's speaking to me. So I climbed down from the bridge and looked around, and no one was there, and I just took my coat off, and probably I was wearing this scarf, and you know, I didn't have anything with me. I got in just in my underwear, but a dip, truly a dip, and it was freezing and it was horrible, but it was also, you know, I had this sense of, oh, there's something here. And I, you know, I sort of realized, I think this might help me somehow. And so began, you know, months of going every morning and slowly beginning to find some sense of peace. And it was a growing journey. It was a relationship that was evolving, and eventually I began to, I was able to cry for the first time in the water, in the lake. You
started to release your grief as you were going swimming.
I literally would feel every morning that the apple would dislodge a little bit more. Of course, now I know that's down to dopamine and endorphins, but it was also the magnitude of it, and it was so mysterious. And I felt that whatever was going on back home, when I was in the water, it was just me and the water.
And I think it's something you talk about in your book, actually, is this, when you go off on your journey, you say that you needed to be moving, but not with an end goal in mind. And I think that's because grief feels, we know this so well now, that they're like, the stages of grief they're not linear and they are all coming up all the time. Sometimes you get all 6 of them on 5 of them, 6 of them now on a daily basis. And I think that swimming, going into the water, is a little bit like that. There's no beginning, middle and end. And so you sort of, there are real parallels, I think, between, that open-ended journey of going swimming and the open-ended journey that is grief. And we all know, right, we're going to be grieving forever. That grief will be with us forever, and it will change and our lives will grow around it. But the grief stays the same, really. It stays the same size. So yeah, I'm really struck by that, and how and the release as well. When you talk about this release, it being a release, that's something I really relate to as well. And I remember the first time I went swimming was very similar, remarkably similar. It was the sea in Ireland, and it was February, so it's like really nearly at its coldest then, February, March. And I remember being in heightened, terrible anxiety, terrible grief. Like in such a bad way. And I went to see my parents in Ireland, and I said, you have to take me to the sea. I know I need to get in the sea. And they took me to the sea and I got in, and it was, my God, it was unreal. But I remember coming out and I was like, oh my God, it's like somebody gave me a Xanax. You know, that worked. And that was the kind of, you know, same as you, the start of a journey. Yeah. So Freya, so I'm just going to bring you in quickly there, because I think this does actually relate directly to something that you say started right at the start of your book. But I'd like to hear a little bit first about your story and your brother Tom. And yeah, just tell us a little bit about him and how your journey into these incredible tidal pools of Great Britain started.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it'd be lovely to talk about him. I feel like I never get to talk about him enough, which is partly on me sometimes. But my brother Tom, who is a twin, had cancer, and it was misdiagnosed very late, which I think is often very common in teenagers. He was very outdoorsy, loved sailing, loved hiking. We loved hiking together. And so unfortunately, one of the misdiagnoses for teenagers is growing pains. And seeing as he had these amazing long legs, that kind of checked out. And by the time he was finally diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma, it had metastasized a lot, and was horrific for him, was horrific for all of us. And in some ways, I guess we were quite lucky that we had quite a bit of time to say goodbye, because we had 3 years from his diagnosis until he died in 2019. But I think in some ways, 3 years was like never enough to process the shock of that. And also the shock of somebody very young being very ill. And I think a huge part of my grief journey was just denial constantly, because, you know, I was a young woman. I just had my first job in London. I just moved to the city, and you're kind of working out who you are and what you're doing. And suddenly the rules of life did not apply to the personal life of what we were living. And, you know, being in a cancer ward in a hospital was not at all comparing with what I was going and doing in my office. And I suddenly had these two split worlds, and to be able to cope with one. And I think for most people's initial grief journey, coping is just kind of what you're doing. You're coping and you're existing and you're getting by. And so part of coping was just having to be able to have two completely different lives. And so I think distraction was a big part of that for me for a long time. So I was working too hard, I was drinking too much, I was dating too much, I was doing anything I could to not deal with the apple in the throat, the pain in the chest, the reality of any of what we'd experienced. And distractions only really last so long. And I often tried more positive things like yoga or meditation apps or Pilates or running, and nothing ever really seemed to work. I couldn't ever like turn down the volume of the grief. And then on the 1st of January in, I guess it must have been 2020, a friend said, there's a New Year's Day swim at Hampstead Heath Ladies Pond. And I thought, you're swimming on the 1st of January? And it just sounded like something that the kind of person I wanted to be, or like needed to be, the person that could survive this or could do better or earn the life that Tom didn't have, would do. And so I agreed to do it, turned up, and it was amazing. And I was completely hooked after that. And I think the reason that it was so good was that it was the only thing that ever cut through all the noise in my head. Because if you do yoga or you do meditation, you have to have a lot of self-restraint to really quell the grief.
It's a slow burn as well. It's like
exactly.
It's more of a slow burn. Yeah.
And swimming, you have no choice, because the cold water totally takes over. And it was like, Kat used that word peace. It was the first time I had peace in a long time. And I think I see that a lot when I swim, which is partly why I do it, is that it can be very hard to find a grief community. I've attended a lot of good grief events and they're amazing, but finding a community of people that are going through something can be tricky. But when you go to the Ladies Pond, when you go to the Lido, I can see in the chat lots of people are fans of Clevedon Marine Lake, which is an amazing thing.
That's a great one. Yeah.
When you turn up there, you have a real sense that the people here are struggling, they're going through something and they're there to swim. And I think that's been incredibly helpful. I've got very addicted to that, not just to swimming, but being in a space where I feel like people understand that we're there to get through something, even if it's not from a conversation. I just always get the sense that on the poolside, people are going through a divorce, they're going through heartbreak, they're dealing with addiction, they're dealing with loss. There's a real sense that these are the people that are out trying to fight that feeling. And I think that's a big part of the hook of swimming and my grief journey as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we talked a little bit about this before we came on. There's a sisterhood, and I think, and that is not to disclude any men in the audience today. There's also a brotherhood, and I've met incredible men, and one of my best male friends is my swimming partner. But I do think it's interesting that, the sisterhood has really emerged in the last 5 years, and it's something that I talk about a lot. It sort of has seemingly come out of nowhere, but maybe it hasn't. And maybe, when we were talking earlier, saying we all turned away from swimming in our teens, having been really into the water as children. In our teens, we kind of it was awkward, for you for different reasons. Kat, you spoke about how like wearing a swimming hat over your hair was really hard. And Freya, you talked about you just didn't like having your body on show in a swimming pool. And I think probably it's probably some of the body stuff and just feeling so painfully aware of your changing shape. But that how do I articulate this? There is a growing movement of women who are returning to the water. And I have been involved in various different women's groups, especially in Ireland, around the Celtic traditions. And every time I go on one of these retreats, and I know, Freya, you've been on a wild swimming retreat down in Cornwall. It's incredible how women encourage each other to get in the water in this way that is very sort of, no, you can do this, but not pushy. It's kind of, no, you come with me, you can do this, we've got this. And I think that that's another key part of it. You've got the kind of the circuit breaker side of it, which is, getting into the water and feeling like, oh my God, yes, okay, that has shifted something. But then there's this other thing around the community and the sisterhood, where you are encouraged to be brave and strong, but held in held at the same time in a tender way, by the women that you meet there. Is that something that you have both found? I'll come to you first, Freya, and then to you, Kat.
Oh yeah, I think feminine water feels very feminine, doesn't it? It feels like it holds you. And so I think it does help you get in touch with that feminine power, which is so often needed in grief as a form of expression. I definitely went through a phase loved swimming when I was younger. It was some of my fondest childhood memories. And then I think something happens for so many of us. The thought of putting on a swimsuit and being at a pool feels a bit scary. You don't want to put on a bikini, you're going through your hips changing, having body hair, your period starting. And I just totally fell out with it. And then it was only later in life, back in that swim at Hampstead Heath, that I found it again. And I think another part that's been wonderful for that is to not only see women of all ages, sizes, shapes, everybody in a changing room, and to delight in the fact that your body can swim, and to view your body as something that can deliver you the joy of swimming, when I think so often society is asking us to think about it as lots of other things. And I find swimming really helpful for that. I can see in the chat that lots of people are from Scotland or Edinburgh, and one of the
the diehards, my God. Yeah. I had the coldest swim of my life in Scotland. It was terrifying.
So those diehards, I'm sure, probably know about the amazing swims that you can do around Castle Sands and Castle Pool and so many of these places along the coast. Swimming was often used as a form of torture or persecution for so-called witches. I found it very interesting that it's now something that's being totally reclaimed as a source of feminine power, because a lot of the time when you do go swimming, it is a lot of women. And I think that that's been really interesting as well, to have that historical understanding of the coast, and to now see women out, whatever the weather, using their power in a really positive way and reclaiming those spaces. And I kind of began a huge healing journey through swimming that was very much supported and held by women. I went on a swimming holiday with complete strangers. None of us knew each other, met an amazing friend. And it was like the biggest romance story of my life, was my relationship with my friend that, is the basis for a lot of my book and our adventure. But I think you see it everywhere.
Talk a little bit about that friend, because I think she's so key to the book, and it's such a magical and beautiful friendship.
Yeah, so we met at a swimming holiday. I think I was feeling so in need of some kind of break from my life and from London, and so went on you should look it up if anybody loves swimming. It's called the Salt Sisterhood, so called Sisterhood.
Drop that in the chat actually, because there's somebody who's looking for swimming holidays. Can you drop
Salt
that in
Sisterhood, Cornwall. And we went and met, and I think that female friendship and sisterhood does not get enough credit for the romance it gives us in our lives. I think we focused a lot on, I can see Kat nodding, on romantic relationships, but really a huge amount of the romance in my 20s has been through my friend who's Mary, who I write about in the book. And I was grieving, she'd been made redundant and, had a breakup, and we were just both so lost, and I think needed to be feeling like we were having some kind of progress and on our way to somewhere. So we decided we were going to swim in every tidal pool in Britain, and we were going to do it in a year. And in many ways, that was probably not the healthiest distraction, because it kind of set this very rigorous challenge around doing something that was supposed to be fun. But we did it. And really what was wonderful about that was the time together to commit to being outdoors and to support one another through what was a very turbulent year. And I think probably why we were both drawn to tidal pools is that tidal pools are natural sea pools that fill with water in an ebbing tide, but that also have some kind of man-made elements. So whether that's steps, or whether there's a kind of cement boundary, or whether there's been dynamite used to actually create the pool and the cliffs. So it's a perfect harnessing of nature. And I think why I was so drawn to it at that time was that it creates a way for you to be in the sea, which feels scary, unbounded, limitless, but in kind of a safe enclosure. And I think I needed that for my grief at the time. My grief felt like if I let myself accept what had happened, I just worried I would never come back from it. I just refused to let myself be sad or not be busy, because I thought if I let myself be sad, I won't ever stop crying. I just didn't for years. And then as we began swimming in tidal pools, that kind of became the way that I was able to be like, you will stop crying. And then maybe the next day you'll cry, but you'll be okay. And
I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
I think, and it certainly, from what I understand of, I'm Irish, and we have some pretty strong pagan beliefs in Ireland still. And what we really believe about the feminine is that it needs to be held, that the feminine without boundaries is too expansive. And you talk about what you've actually done with that trip is say, right, we're going to do this thing, and you've brought in that kind of more masculine element. We're going to do it in this amount of time, and this is how we're going to do it. But you've got the feminine of being with your friend, and the swimming, and the tidal pool really represents, really is symbolic of that, I think. I'm going to come back to one of your points in a minute about how you expressed your grief and how you felt you weren't grieving right. But I want to come back to that. But I'd like to bring Kat in here about the, because I know that there was a particular woman who you met when you were swimming, who you brought into the film, and who has a role in the film. She doesn't have a role. She's played by Celia Imrie. But yeah, please tell all.
Yeah, and I was just thinking as well, I love what you just said about the meeting of masculine and feminine, because I think I as a teen loved, well, up to teenage years, was like, kind of a serious swimmer in the pools, training, and not like super high level, but up to like county level, which I guess at the time was quite high, and really kind of took it so seriously. But the structure of it eventually, I think, was part of what turned, everything Freya said. It was as though she was speaking about my own life, that feeling of, the body changing, and then there was the whole element of the hair, and it just didn't work for me to be enclosed in this rigid space. So I just, took it away and said, no more. But coming back to it, almost 10 years later, at the time when I needed it, and it being so wild in a way, like I don't swim in pools at all anymore. I swim in lakes only, pretty much. And the sea when I can, but sadly I don't live near the sea. But just finding that space of freedom, and I think a lot of that in part was to do with the women that I met along the way, who would, and it's in the film as well, you'll see it, but there's a moment where the character is about to get in for the first time, or trying to get in for the first time, and she really she can't bring herself to do it. And Celia Imrie, who's called Gloria in the film, just says, just like splash your chest, and just gives her this tiny it's just an olive branch, and it's not, there's no pressure around it. It's just try that, and if if that works for you, I'm here. And she doesn't say anything else, and they haven't even spoken at that point, but she just watches. And I think, I mean, in real life, there was this woman, is this woman, and we now are, yeah, we're very close, Henrika. But at the time, we, for weeks on end, we didn't even really speak. It was just, we're in the same space, and we're sharing this space together. And it's, grew from kind of me being like, I don't really want anyone else to be here, to kind of like a nod every morning, to eventually these tips. And she's fearless, brilliant, my biggest swimming inspiration. And I think that in itself it is so inspirational to see women of all ages, and all of this sense, all the things we're taught about how our bodies should be and what our bodies should do, that's gone when I'm at the water with these women. Because I just think, I had this, always would say to myself, my body is my chariot, because I felt like I would fly when I was in the water. My body will take me wherever I need it to go. And it removed all of the, the horrible thoughts that you tell yourself about how your body is disgusting or not worthy or should be serving this purpose. No, my body is my chariot, and it will take me as far and as wide as I need it to.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful quote. Yeah, that's really gorgeous. I think this is a good moment to maybe show the trailer for the film.
Sure.
Cat. So we've got two cats. We've got cat on screen and cat off screen. So Katrine, off screen, are you able to show the trailer just quickly?
Dad, what is it that you love about sunflowers?
They follow the sun.
I want us to do something for Dad.
54 days though, that's quite a task.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a very special film. I've seen the longer length version, and you can watch it today. So it's 15 minutes long, isn't it, Kat? And it's on the page. So the page where you went to register to attend the event, you can now watch the film there for the rest of today until 6 o'clock tonight, I think. Do watch it. It's really beautiful. And yeah, I think you're developing it into a feature film. Yeah.
Got ideas for how it will be, but the short in itself is just a journey of grief and swimming and hope.
Hope. It is about hope, and I think that is something that, I don't know, you do find that when you get into the cold water, you go in and you're like, there is always, I remember somebody saying to me recently, because I've been doing it for a few years, and my relationship with pain has changed quite significantly, and my relationship with how brave I can be and how I can take risks now. Like I was just speaking to you guys earlier and telling you my own story. My dad died when I was young. He died suddenly in a car accident, and I experienced delayed grief. I didn't actually start grieving for him until he turned the age that he was when he died. Very bizarre kind of set of circumstances to start grieving when you're 32 for somebody who died when you were 3.5. So I then had a very strange relationship with fear. I became gripped by fear, and my life just shrank down to really spreadsheets and things I could control and things I could guarantee. And my fear of death and grief was intense. My fear of grief was so intense. So I started working for a grief festival. It seemed a smart thing to do. But as I started getting into the water, that relationship with fear and that relationship with, seeing danger all around me sort of started shifting. And through that, I started taking risks again. I started living fully again. I started realizing that life is too short to want to control every aspect of it or try to control every aspect of it. And that grief is a part of life, and that it's awful and it's painful. And I wish it weren't ever going to happen to anybody, but it is also, you can do it. We can all do it. We are hardwired to do this. So yeah, we said that we would kind of bring this into the conversation earlier. How has it changed your relationship with courage and fear? And has it allowed you to kind of, I look at the two of you and you're incredible. What you're doing is amazing. You've written and created these incredible pieces of work, and there's so much else going on in your lives, and you're so young. I think you're remarkable. And I just I sort of wonder, has the water allowed you, swimming in cold water allowed you to go for it, to just because you went for it? Does it encourage you to go for it on a daily basis? Kat, do you want to speak about that first, and then Freya?
Yeah, I think particularly in those early days of discovering swimming as a means of getting through each day, I got to a point where, and maybe this is right or wrong, but I knew that if I could just make it to the lake and swim, I was going to be okay for another day. And I could only survive, and I've never been like this before or since, but I could only survive on a day-by-day basis. And I knew that if I could swim, I would feel better. And if I felt better, I would get through another day. And I think that mentality, even though now I don't have to swim every single day to know that I'm going to wake up in the morning and still want to be here, if you know what I'm saying, I still have that feeling within me that I have the courage and the strength, I suppose, because I got through that period, and because I got through that period with swimming, I know that I can get through anything. I hope, touch wood, there isn't much, I don't think life can throw much worse at me. But if it does, I have a coping mechanism, and I know that I have a community, but I also have something that I can find for myself. And it's always with me now. The water is it's kind of like a religion in a way, because it's something that I can turn to when I have nowhere else I can go, and it's not going to go anywhere. There's a constancy, and I think that in itself is so reassuring. And I think that comfort can make me brave, because I know I found a way to cope, and if I need it, if I really need it, it will be there. And so I can kind of be freer and be braver in trying, I suppose, to make the most of life. I think also probably for all of us, when you experience that kind of grief, you have a sense, almost an obligation, that you have to keep living better, bigger than before, because you owe it to your loved one who doesn't have that chance anymore.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think you feel like you're living for two people, and you sort of yeah, that I really relate to that. Freya, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and something else I'd love to come back to that you mentioned, Kat, and that also I just thought was so beautifully captured in your film, was that relationship of consistency and also seasonality, and that when life is really hard to get through, swimming connects you with the outdoors in a very real way. So you notice when it's spring because the degrees change, the plants on the banks, or the coastal flowers change, and time becomes a little bit easier to get through, the year becomes a little bit easier to get through. And that's something you also kind of touched on in your film, about the other ways people cope with that through gardening or the outdoors. Courage is definitely a great word for swimming, because although I'm a swimmer, whenever I take people with me for the first time, I'm in the shallows kind of going, oh, it's cold, I don't want to do it.
And it leaves you, does it?
No, it's not pleasant the first time. And it's really quite bracing when you get in, and I get it very much at the back of my neck. And then you overcome it, and then it feels amazing. And really, that is great practice for every time you overcome that cold and you conquer it, you can deal with anything. And for all of us on this call that have lost somebody, I mean, whenever I'm getting stressed about something, I think, well, even if the worst case happens now, it will not be anywhere near as bad. it will be fine because I can do it. And I think I was really interested of what that feeling was, why I wasn't panicked as much, why I wouldn't. Sometimes I would be in the office and I would have a memory or a thought and something would come up. I would go, we've talked a lot about body responses. I would go cold, but I would be hot, and my vision would go a bit blurry. And I think for lots of us, you have PTSD, or you're in shock, or just grief is very physical.
Visceral, yeah.
Visceral, yeah. But when you're swimming, when we go into fight or flight response, there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, which controls that. And it can be very slow to calm down and for us to gain control again, because we're in panic and our body's trying to keep us safe. But cold water really activates that part of the brain. So it often becomes easier and easier to overcome panic. So if you're somebody that suffers with panic attacks or PTSD, exposure to cold water over time helps you be in control of coming back into the moment, of being able to get out of your fight or flight response brain and get into reason brain, where you can go, you're going to be okay, things are fine. And that exposure and shock from cold water, I think, really has helped me feel like I'm in control of a life where we've all learned when we lose someone, you're not in control. We're not in control at all. And so I think the physical effects of swimming and cold water have been huge for me. And then the last thing I think I'd say about that is, I just think hearing you talk about your dad is just I'm so sad for you. And I'm so sorry. And that, you kind of said, oh, it's crazy to have grieved all this time later. But really, it makes total sense, because your body and your brain is just trying to keep you safe. And I think for me, it maybe was like 3 or 4 years later that I even coped or gave myself time to think about it. But your body is really trying to look out for you. And grief is a consequence of loving somebody. It's a consequence of having something that you care about enough that when you lose, it is incredibly painful. And I think I, for a long time, was scared to love people, love things, engage in anything in case I got back to that pain. And I think probably through a variety of swimming, friendships, partnership, hope, time, I'm a little bit closer to accepting that it is always worth loving and having the consequence of loss, but to have the richness of that. But it takes a while to get to any kind of acceptance of time for that. And yeah, it's just horrible though, isn't it?
It's awful. It's awful, and nothing can change how awful it is. But I think we had an event with David Kessler last night, and it was really good. He said some really amazing things, and what he talked about was where you move from a stage where your grief just is love. And when you're in those early stages of grief, it is impossible. And because they're so tightly intertwined, grief and love, it's hard to love even when you're grieving, because the grief is all there is. But over time, and we know this, we know this from our experiences, that over time that loosens, and the love is just the love is the more defining factor. And I went for a walk earlier today. I live in a valley, and I thought of my dad, and my heart felt full. It feels that when sometimes I think about him and I get it's up here and it's like, oh yeah, that's painful today. But then most often now it's here. It's in my heart, and I'm like, oh God, I was really lucky. We had something really special. You've got your hand up there, Freya.
Oh, yeah, that was lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to think a little bit more about where that feeling sits now, after you've described it as full. But something else I wanted to add was that I don't know how far people are in their grief journey on the call, but I realize it might be frustrating for me to talk about that acceptance, because I was not there for a long time. And one of the feelings of grief is love, but the opposite side of that for a long time is anger and rage. And I didn't get to the anger and rage until I was closer to the acceptance. But I just wanted to mention that swimming is such a powerful part of that, and was something I loved about Kat's film, was that their water was like kind of as it exists in the film as a motif of peace, but of also, I guess the wildness of water does mean it's a great container for anger. And when I met my partner, one of the things, he swims, and he said, well, swimming's a great place to scream. And in a city, there aren't many places you can scream. And he kind of, we would go to the Lido or to the ponds, and he would encourage me to go underwater and scream. And it was the first time that I was able to do that and connect with that part. And it is so hard to have the rage that you have when you lose someone in the world, because where are you supposed to put that in a way that it's not destroying or destructive to the people around you? And the physicality of swimming. And every time, everyone, next time you go swimming, scream underwater. I promise it's amazing. So yeah, I just want to add that.
That was another thing David Kessler said last night. It was just one line that I was like, oh, that's so good. He said that anger is the bodyguard of pain. And I'm just like, yes, it is. And, you know, it's okay to be angry. And, you know, somebody in the comments has said, we'll come to some questions in a minute. Yeah, we will come to some questions in a minute. Is everybody okay to go over today? I just feel like we're still kind of, just go over it by a little bit. Somebody has said, how do you get to the acceptance stage? I don't think you actually do ever fully accept that the person you've loved has died and are gone. So I just wanted to say that, to reassure them that it's acceptance that they've died, and acceptance that they're gone, and acceptance that, well, for me, this is, and it's so personal for everybody, you know, I'd never, ever, ever assume that two people's grief is the same. But I do think that acceptance is accepting that they're gone, accepting that it's always going to be painful, but accepting that life can go on without it, without this person, that without this relationship. So it's gentler than that. It's not like a stage where you're like, oh, I'm fully in acceptance of this, everything is fine. I think, yeah. What would you say about that, Kat?
I mean, I wanted to pick up as well on what Freya just said, because I think we do have a tendency also, which is, I guess, a survival instinct, to talk about the good, right? And when we swim and it's amazing, but there are also days, or I have had days, where the water is not my friend and I'm not the water's friend. And like, whether it's that my emotions are in the wrong place, but it's not working. And I think, you know, the danger of that as well is something that I sometimes worry we don't see quite enough. And I've seen a lot in the chat about, you know, like, would I swim alone? And no, actually, because at first I didn't know this, but I was often swimming alone. And now I know that is so dangerous, especially when you're in these emotionally volatile places. And I think, yes, the water is, you know, she is beautiful and she is peace and she is healing, but she is also violent. And especially when violence meets violence, I think that can be a really scary thing as well. So just to kind of acknowledge that, yeah, there are different ways that we can approach the water, and recognizing when we might need to approach it in a different way, or with a buddy by our side.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's super important to say, that we are, you know, there are probably people here today who would really love to do this, and maybe you're feeling a little bit kind of, oh God, that sounds, you know, like we really know what we're doing. You do have to have a really good, there's loads of literature out there, really simple to understand, about what to do and what not to do. Unfortunately, I learned the hard way with a lot of it, like staying in too long and, you know, getting that freezing cold that stays with you for, you know, 48 hours afterwards. So I would really encourage anybody, you can totally do it. And if I was sitting beside you right now, I would say, you can do it. Everybody can do it. We are not special. We are not super women. We are just normal people, and everybody can do it. And I really believe that. And I have seen it time and time again. But do Google, and, you know, like, just say safety for swimming in British waters. And there's like some really great infographics and stuff out there. It's really simple advice, but it does really make a difference. So I'm going to come to some questions from the audience. As somebody's asked for practical recommendations. So, I mean, my personal one would be, yes, if you feel like you need a wetsuit, do a wetsuit. You know, also the handies and footies, which is, I know they have probably a more technical name than that, are really effective. A woolly hat and the gloves and socks that you wear if you're going surfing, they're not expensive, and they do really just, I find them incredible. I find them just as effective as a wetsuit. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I have some little socks, which I think are great. Hat's always a good idea, because that's where you lose most heat. And I think, Kat, something that you said is, I've really learned that, you know, when you swim a lot, you go, okay, well, if it's 5 degrees, I can probably do about 5 or 6 minutes. But I think I've learned over time that is different every day, whether you've had different amount of sleep, if you're hungover, if you're tired, if you're stressed, where you are in your menstrual cycle. And like, it teaches you to be really in touch with where you are in your body, to understand that every day your tolerance for cold water is a little bit different. When I started, I think I would kind of go the amount of degrees, 1 minute each. So if it's 5 degrees, 5 minutes. You can start by going to places that are lifeguarded. That's often a good tip. But I love my neoprene socks. I mean, 3 millimeters of neoprene is not much, but I feel like it makes a big difference somehow.
Yeah, they're amazing. They really
yeah.
do make such a difference. But yeah, there's loads of stuff online. Have a hot drink with you for afterwards. Get clothes on you straight away. Don't, you'll come out of the water and you'll feel like Thor, you'll just be like, oh my God, I'm never going to be cold again. That is not, don't ignore that. That is wrong. Get your clothes on really quickly. Scarves, everything.
And cake is essential. You must have cake when you finish swim. It's a rule.
Yeah, the cake is a big part of the whole thing, right? I have a question.
Someone's saying hot water bottle, which is also great.
I always do that. Yeah. On my tummy afterwards. Yeah.
And it's a nice offering if you want to make a friend. If you've got some cake or a hot water bottle and you're nervous to strike up a conversation with somebody, you can ask if they want some cake or a go on your hot water bottle. But the mental health community is great as well. And there's loads in different local areas. And I know we've spoken a lot about women in this session, but there are also some great men's groups, including Blue Balls Cornwall, which is a great men's swimming group as well.
Blue Balls, great name, brilliant name.
Yeah.
Jamila asks, any swimming lakes in the Midlands? I used to swim so much as a child growing up in Wales and in all weathers, but haven't been for a while and would so love to go. I don't know the Midlands very well. There is, oh my gosh, this is really unprofessional, but I'm just there's a book. There's here though, hang on.
The Outdoor Swimming Society website and Outdoor Swimmer websites are great as well. They're fantastic.
Really good, and written by a guy, I think who's Bristol based, and gives really great places all over the country. So yeah, the Wild Guide for anybody who's looking for.
And I think some of the Wild Guides, which I also have up here somewhere, are also written by Sophie Pearce, who is a fantastic person to follow, and also has a grief I actually have it here, who has a grief memoir coming out. For anybody that's lost a child, I think it's a fantastic read. It's called The Green Hill.
Oh yes, I've seen this one. I've seen it somewhere.
That's more swimming recommendations.
We've done a kind of the recommendations for wild swimming retreat. Maybe we'll send an email after this actually with some resources. I think that would be really helpful. Making wild swimming more inclusive. How can outdoor open wild swimming be made more accessible to communities who may be underrepresented in swimming groups, for example, people of colour, LGBTQ+? It's a really good question. And I think that applies to everything about nature and walking and hiking and everything. It is a bit, it is quite like white middle class. And yeah, like we hear the similar voices a lot of the time, I think. So I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think it's about, once you're in the spaces are so welcoming and so, nourishing. But I think it's about bringing more people in as often as we can. And that's why I did in a way take it upon myself, because I haven't met too many other Black wild swimmers, to be honest. But I've taken it upon myself to be vocal and out there about what swimming has done for me, and hopefully by having these conversations and people seeing someone like me, that will encourage others to try it. And I think we all have a responsibility to welcome in whoever, and I think I know everyone on this call is already so welcoming and inclusive, but just to be that outstretched arm, I think, and making sure that it doesn't ever feel like an exclusive group, which it isn't. It's one of the warmest, most, so just, being like that. And I think I work a lot with Soul Cap, who are an inclusive swimwear brand. They have swimming caps for afros and, spreading their word. There are lots of amazing groups out there. And I think it's just about recognizing them and making sure that those conversations feed into our communities. I think, And I
think as well, with a lot of what wild swimming already is, so much of it is just like grassroots and organic as well. Like, it's not like we all sort of, we didn't all decide together, you know, there wasn't like, you know, an internet campaign to get people swimming. It sort of has a life of its own, I think, and hopefully we'll see more representation as the movement kind of grows over the next few years. I have a question here. What have you found to be the most profound realization you've had in the water?
That's a great question.
Really good question. I'm just trying to think. I mean, I've had some big ones.
I think often when I'm in the water, I feel a little bit more connected to nature. And I think it's often in those moments that I'll be looking at something and I'll maybe notice like a particular plant or maybe like a duck. And I'll think, oh my goodness, the last time I saw one of those was, and then I'll have a think about it and realize how far I've come in a year. And I think finding a way to be immersed in nature has really given me a sense of time and seasonality that's been very important. The other, this might sound a bit woo, but I'll give it a go anyway.
We love a bit of woo woo.
A bit of woo. It's that one of my very early dates with my partner, we were messing about in the pool and he was kind of pulling my legs underwater and we were and it super reminded me of a game I used to play with my siblings when we were on holiday, which was like dolphins, where one of us would put our hands on the shoulder of the other and we'd like pretend to be a dolphin. And I just had a flash of feeling like I feel very sad that my partner won't ever meet my brother. It makes me so sad. And I had a real flash that they were somehow meeting in that moment, because it was like water really connects me to a playful childhood part of myself that really I don't get to be in life very much, especially after death. I feel like I'm quite a serious person. And in the water, I get to be transported to the sister that Tom knew. And I feel like in some ways, other people get to meet that person and be connected to him via that. And I had a real flash of it once when we were in Brockwell Lido, and it was very spooky, but it was nice. It was really nice.
Yeah, that's so lovely. Yeah. Like you, I brought my boyfriend on swimming on our second date. I remember my friends just saying, "Oh my God, the poor guy." What are you thinking?
It grieves. It says love and loss. They're very entwined. To like trust and loss, there's the same, isn't it? And important that they belong together.
New relationships come in all the time, don't they? Whether it's friends or partners or, you know, whoever it is, we lose people and we lose relationships, but new relationships are being born all the time. I really liked what you said, Freya, about this, that sort of, it gives you, I think when you're very connected to nature like that, or where you're seeing nature every day. So like I do kind of the same walk every day. And I really noticed today, oh my God, the buds are really coming out now. And it immediately made me think, my God, I've come so far in the last 3 years. Because I remember you know, it gives you these amazing sort of bookends and, you know, moments to reflect and go, God, yeah, this time X many years or however long ago, I was here doing that. Wow, I'm really glad that's not happening right now, and how far you've come. I think that's a really important point. How about you, Kat? Any big aha moments in the water?
I mean, so many, from like, oh, I don't think I want to be dating this person, to, oh my goodness, this is what I need to write my next film about. But also, you know, on a more profound level, I think it's just about letting go. I'm such a held person. I carry the weight of the world, and in the water, I can't carry it anymore, because all I can do is focus on my stroke and my breathing and the duck and the, you know, it's whatever's in front of me, and it shakes off all of that stuff that I'm carrying every single day, every minute of my life. When I'm in the water, I'm not carrying it anymore. And, you know, that is something that I sometimes, even when I'm not in the water, I try and recreate that feeling when I can feel myself, you know, weighing myself down again. So yeah, it has to be that for me.
It's almost like it washes away, doesn't it, as well? It's
Yeah.
kind of, I know that I was sort of, yeah, I'll go for a swim today or tomorrow. I'm, you know, on the back of doing we've done the day of reflection, then we've had a festival today, and I'm like, yeah, I really need to kind of wash that away. Yeah, I think that's really, I think that's really profound. where are we? What time is it? Oh my God, it's 3:00. Katrina's going to kill me. So I do need to wrap up because we've got other events, I think, after this. I think we'll send an email to people with lots of resources and just, links to everything that we've talked about today, and also links to buy your amazing books. Which are, what an exciting time for both of you. I really feel really connected to both of you today, and I am incredibly excited for what's to come. And I know that both of you are going to do incredible things. I have no doubt about that in my mind. Do watch Kat's film, which is on the page on the maybe Katrine, you could just drop it in there. It's 15 minutes, and it's 15 minutes of everything. It's poignant, it's joyful, it's hopeful. It's a really extraordinary piece. So I do need to wrap up now. I would like to say huge thanks to both of you, Freya and Kat, for being here with us today. And just go for it, right? That's our advice, isn't it? Just go for it in a safe and controlled way initially, and you will be so surprised and astounded at what it can do for you, I think.
Dive in, everyone.
Exactly what I was thinking.
First, like, step in, maybe.
Take the plunge.
Yeah, thanks a million, guys. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the clocks going forward tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting.
Not at all.
Yes, Aisling, you've been amazing. And thank you everyone in the chat for being so giving as well and sharing your stories. And it's been a really special event. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.